The roar of the crowd echoed through the vast arena, a deafening mix of alien voices and thrumming energy. Thousands of eyes, some glowing, others piercing, were fixed on the center of the blood games, where the next challenger from Earth was set to appear. The air was thick with anticipation, a cocktail of disdain and curiosity swirling among the spectators. Earth was an oddity here, a new entrant in a contest dominated by galactic titans, and no one expected much. From the shadowed tunnel leading into the arena, a single figure emerged, stepping into the harsh light. Clad in a suit of reflective armor that gleamed like polished steel, the figure was imposing, tall, broad-shouldered, with a helmet that masked his face, revealing only his eyes, cold, determined, and unyielding. A hush fell over the crowd as they took in the sight. This was Earth's champion, the Juggernaut. The announcer, a serpentine creature with a voice like a rusted blade, hissed into the microphone, introducing the Juggernaut with a tone dripping in sarcasm. From the primitive world of Earth, a lone warrior dares to challenge the might of the galaxy. Behold, the Juggernaut! A wave of laughter and jeers erupted, the crowd already dismissing the human as easy prey. As the noise died down, a hulking figure entered the arena from the opposite side, a Gorgoth warrior, standing nearly 9 feet tall, with a body encased in chitinous armor and eyes that glowed with malevolent intent. The Gorgoth raised its massive, clawed hands to the crowd, eliciting a thunderous cheer. It had been undefeated for a reason. Its brute strength and impenetrable exoskeleton were legendary. The Juggernaut stood still, his eyes locked onto his opponent, his mind calculating every possible move. Inside his helmet, his breath was steady, controlled, a stark contrast to the frenzied energy around him. A voice crackled in his ear, breaking the silence. "Remember your training. This isn't about winning, it's about surviving," said Dr. Callahan, the grizzled scientist who had overseen his transformation from an ordinary soldier into a genetically enhanced warrior. There was a hint of something else in Callahan's voice. Was it concern or contempt? The Juggernaut didn't reply. His focus was on the Gorgoth, who was now charging across the arena, shaking the ground with each thunderous step. The Juggernaut sidestepped with surprising agility for his size, his enhanced reflexes kicking in. The Gorgoth's claws slashed through the air where he had just been, missing him by inches. The crowd gasped, then roared with renewed excitement. He could feel the power coursing through his augmented muscles, the cybernetic implants enhancing his movements beyond normal human capacity. But he knew he couldn't rely solely on his enhancements. The blood games demanded more than brute strength. They required cunning, strategy, and the ability to adapt, traits that had often been underestimated in humans. The Gorgoth lunged again, and this time, the Juggernaut met it head-on. With a swift, calculated motion, he grabbed one of its massive arms and twisted, using the alien's momentum against it. The Gorgoth's bellow of pain reverberated through the arena as it crashed to the ground, its arm twisted at an unnatural angle. The Juggernaut didn't give it a chance to recover. He pivoted, bringing his armored knee down onto the creature's chest with a sickening crunch. The Gorgoth wheezed, its armor finally cracked under the pressure. From his position in the stands, Dr. Callahan watched intently, his face a mask of concentration. The Juggernaut's performance was exceeding expectations, but the scientist's eyes narrowed, a flicker of doubt crossing his mind. "Watch your right, Juggernaut. It's not over yet," he warned. The Gorgoth, though injured, was far from defeated. With a roar of defiance, it swung its other arm, claws extended. The Juggernaut barely managed to dodge, the claws scraping across his armor, leaving deep gouges. He stumbled back, regaining his footing just in time to see the creature struggling to rise. He knew he had to end this quickly. His enhancements had limits, and every move drained precious energy. In a swift, decisive motion, the Juggernaut launched himself forward, his enhanced legs propelling him with incredible speed. He landed on the Gorgoth's back, grabbing its head with both hands. With a violent twist, he snapped the creature's neck, the sound like a dry branch breaking underfoot. The Gorgoth collapsed, lifeless, to the arena floor. For a moment, silence reigned. The crowd, stunned by the unexpected turn of events, sat frozen. Then, As the reality of what had happened sank in, a murmur of disbelief spread, quickly growing into a cacophony of mixed reactions: boos, cheers, and startled applause. The Juggernaut stood tall over his fallen opponent, his chest heaving, his armor scratched but unbroken. Dr. Callahan's voice cut through the noise. "Good work, but don't get complacent. The real challenges are yet to come." There was an edge to his tone, a warning laced with something darker. The Juggernaut nodded, still catching his breath. He knew this was only the beginning. The blood games were far from over, and he had much to prove, not just to the galaxy, but to himself and the shadowed figures who doubted him within his own team. As he turned to leave the arena, a single thought echoed in his mind: survival was not enough. To honor Earth and his own transformation, he had to win. He had to show them all what it meant to be human. The Juggernaut stood in the shadows of the preparation chamber, his breath coming in steady, measured gulps. The roar of the crowd still reverberated through the walls, a chaotic blend of shock, outrage, and reluctant admiration. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, a heady mix of victory and the realization that this was far from over. His first battle had been a triumph, but the blood games demanded more than just a single victory. They demanded endurance, strategy, and the ability to outthink opponents who had spent lifetimes perfecting their brutal craft. Dr. Callahan approached, his face a mask of stoic concern. "You did well out there," he said, his voice flat. "But don't let it get to your head. The Gorgoth was just the beginning. The next challenge will be more than just brute force." The Juggernaut nodded, still scanning the room for any sign of the next opponent. He knew the blood games were notorious for their unpredictability. One moment you could be facing a hulking beast, the next, a nimble assassin with lethal precision. "What do you know about the next match?" he asked, his voice steady, betraying none of the tension coiling in his gut. Callahan hesitated for a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his eyes before he spoke. "It's a team battle this time. 3 against 1. They're smaller, faster, with psychic capabilities. They'll try to mess with your head, disorient you before they strike. Your enhancements will help resist some of it, but not all." The Juggernaut grunted. He had faced psychic opponents in training before, but nothing could prepare him for the real thing. The mental conditioning he'd undergone had been intense, breaking him down and rebuilding him with a fortified psyche. Still, he knew better than to underestimate any alien combatant. "I'll need to stay sharp. Keep my focus." Callahan's lips tightened into a thin line. "You'll need more than that. If they manage to get inside your head, even for a second, it could be over." There was a strange intensity in his voice, a mix of fear and something else, something darker. Before the Juggernaut could press further, a deep, resonant chime echoed through the chamber, signaling the start of the next round. The heavy metal gates of the arena groaned open, revealing the bright, blinding light beyond. The Juggernaut squared his shoulders and stepped forward, feeling the familiar weight of his armor settle around him like a second skin. The crowd's roars surged again as he emerged, their voices a wave of sound that crashed over him. Across the arena, 3 figures materialized from the shadows, moving with eerie synchronization. They were smaller than the Gorgoth, lithe and agile, their bodies shimmering with an otherworldly iridescence. Their eyes glowed a soft blue, a stark contrast to the dark, chitinous exoskeletons that encased their slender forms. The psychic triad, known as the Synapse, was renowned for their ability to move as one, their minds connected in a way that made them almost impossible to predict. The Juggernaut could feel a slight pressure building in his temples, a telltale sign of the Synapse's mental probing. He tightened his grip on his weapon, focusing on his breathing to steady his mind. He knew he had to act quickly, to disrupt their cohesion before they could launch a coordinated attack. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet seemed to shift, the arena warping and twisting in his vision. He blinked hard, fighting to clear his head. The Synapse were inside his mind, bending reality with their psychic assault. He stumbled, his enhanced senses struggling to process the conflicting signals. "Focus, damn it!" Callahan's voice barked in his ear, sharp and cutting through the haze. "Remember your training. Gritting his teeth, the Juggernaut forced himself to concentrate, drawing on the mental conditioning he had endured. He visualized the wall, solid and unyielding, pushing back against the invading force. Gradually, the distortion faded, the arena returning to its familiar form. But the Synax were already moving, splitting apart and circling him with predatory grace. The Juggernaut pivoted, tracking their movements with calculated precision. He knew he couldn't let them flank him, couldn't allow them to get too close. He shifted his stance, bracing for the inevitable assault. They struck as one, a blur of motion and shadow. The Juggernaut reacted instinctively, his body a well-honed machine of muscle and metal. He deflected the first attack, spinning away from the second, his armored fist connecting with the third. The impact sent a jolt up his arm, the sensation dulled by his armor but still powerful enough to rattle his bones. The crowd erupted in a mixture of cheers and gasps, their voices a chaotic chorus. The Juggernaut didn't have time to process their reactions. He was already moving, pressing his advantage. He could feel the Synax trying to regroup, their psychic connection faltering under the strain of his relentless assault. One of the Synax slipped behind him, its claws slashing toward his exposed flank. The Juggernaut twisted, narrowly avoiding the blow. He retaliated with a brutal elbow strike, catching the alien under its jaw. It staggered back, its connection with the others flickering like a failing light. A surge of triumph rose in his chest, but he tamped it down. He couldn't afford to get cocky. Not yet. He needed to break their connection completely, to shatter the bond that made them so deadly. With a roar, the Juggernaut charged, throwing himself into the fray with reckless abandon. He targeted the Synax who had faltered, focusing his attacks with brutal efficiency. Blow after blow landed, his fists moving in a blur of controlled fury. The alien crumpled under the onslaught, its psychic link severed in a final, desperate scream. The remaining two Synax hesitated, their movements suddenly disjointed, their attack rhythm broken. The Juggernaut seized the moment, pressing his advantage. He was relentless, a force of nature, his every move calculated to exploit their moment of weakness. With a final, bone-crushing blow, he sent one of the remaining Synax sprawling to the ground, its body limp and unmoving. The last of the trio tried to flee, its resolve broken, but the Juggernaut was faster. He closed the distance in an instant, grabbing the alien by the throat and lifting it off the ground. The arena fell silent, the crowd holding its collective breath as they watched. The Juggernaut stared into the alien's glowing eyes, his grip tightening. He could see the fear there, the realization that they had underestimated him. That everyone had. "Tell your people," he growled, his voice low and menacing. "Earth is not to be trifled with." With a final squeeze, he ended the match, the alien's body falling limp in his grasp. He dropped it to the ground and turned away, his chest heaving with exertion. The crowd erupted once more, a mix of awe and disbelief at the human's brutal display. As the Juggernaut walked back toward the preparation chamber, he could feel the weight of their stares, the shift in their perception. They had seen him as prey, but now they knew he was a predator, a force to be reckoned with. He could still hear the echo of his own words in his mind, a promise of what was to come. The next challenge would be harder. He was certain of that. But he was ready, and he would prove that Earth's spirit was unbreakable. The scent of ozone lingered in the air, mixing with the metallic tang of blood and sweat. The Juggernaut stood at the edge of the arena, his breath heavy and labored, his body bruised but unyielding. Each battle was taking its toll, and he could feel the exhaustion settling into his muscles, creeping up his spine like a shadow. Yet there was no time to rest, no chance to recover fully. The blood games were relentless, and the next round would begin soon. From the shadows of the preparation chamber, Dr. Callahan watched him closely. There was a mixture of pride and unease in his gaze, a glimmer of something unreadable behind his sharp eyes. He approached the Juggernaut with measured steps, his voice low. "You're pushing yourself too hard. The enhancements can only do so much. You need to conserve your strength for what's coming." The Juggernaut met his eyes, a flicker of defiance crossing his face. "What's coming?" he asked, his voice rough from the strain of the battles. Callahan hesitated, then glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers. He leaned in closer, his tone dropping to a whisper. There's been a change. The next opponent isn't just another gladiator. It's a creature, a hybrid, engineered specifically for this match. They're calling it the Mind Eater. It's got the psychic abilities of the Synax, but with the brute strength of a Gorgoth. You need to be prepared for anything. The Juggernaut frowned, processing the information. He could feel a tight knot of tension forming in his gut. The organizers of the Blood Games were notorious for their unpredictability, but this was something else, a deliberate escalation, a challenge designed to break him. What else aren't you telling me, Callahan? He demanded, his voice a low growl. Callahan's expression tightened, his jaw clenching as he looked away. I don't know everything. Just be careful. The Mind Eater can manipulate memories, make you see things that aren't there. It'll try to exploit your fears, your regrets. You have to keep your mind clear, no matter what. A chill ran down the Juggernaut's spine. He knew the risks of facing a psychic opponent, but the idea of his own mind being turned against him was more terrifying than any physical threat. Still, he nodded, his resolve hardening. I'll manage, he said, more to himself than to Callahan. I have to. The gates to the arena began to creak open, the harsh light spilling into the preparation chamber. The crowd's roar was like a living thing, a wave of sound that washed over him as he stepped forward. He could feel their eyes on him, a mix of awe, fear, and expectation. He had become more than just a competitor. He was a symbol, a testament to Earth's determination to survive, to fight, to win. The Mind Eater emerged from the opposite side of the arena, its form a twisted amalgamation of muscle and chitin, its eyes glowing with a cold, otherworldly light. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, its limbs too long and flexible, its body rippling with hidden power. The Juggernaut felt a sudden, intense pressure in his mind, like a vice tightening around his skull. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to focus, to block out the intrusion. The creature's gaze bore into him, and for a moment, the world seemed to shift. The arena blurred, the ground beneath his feet felt unsteady, like the floor of a ship caught in a storm. He blinked, trying to clear his vision, but the images continued to warp and twist around him. Shadows stretched into monstrous shapes, and distant screams echoed in his ears, mingling with his own memories. Remember your training! Callahan's voice crackled in his ear, cutting through the chaos. This is just an illusion. Focus on your breathing. Push it out. The Juggernaut closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, and then another. He could feel his heart hammering in his chest, the blood pounding in his veins. He concentrated on the sound of his own breathing, steady and controlled, letting it drown out the noise, the fear. Slowly, the pressure in his mind began to ease, the world around him coming back into focus. The Mind Eater snarled, sensing its grip on his psyche slipping. It lunged forward, its movements a blur of speed and raw power. The Juggernaut sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the creature's claws as they raked the air where he'd just been. He countered with a swift, brutal strike to its midsection, but the creature barely flinched, its chitinous armor absorbing the impact. He backed away, reassessing his strategy. The Mind Eater was unlike anything he had faced before. Its psychic abilities were strong, but its physical prowess was just as formidable. He couldn't rely on brute strength alone. He needed to outthink it, to find a way to break its concentration. The creature circled him, its eyes never leaving his, its mind probing for any weakness, any crack in his defenses. He could feel it trying to worm its way back into his thoughts, to dredge up memories he'd long buried. He fought back, using every ounce of his training to keep it at bay, to protect his mind. Then, an idea struck him. He remembered something Callahan had once said during one of their brutal training sessions. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense. If you can't block a psychic, overwhelm them. It was a gamble, but he was running out of options. With a roar, he charged forward, his body a blur of motion. He could feel the Mind Eater's confusion, its surprise at his sudden aggression. It hesitated for just a second, but that was all he needed. He aimed a powerful kick at its legs, knocking it off balance, then followed up with a series of rapid, punishing blows to its torso. He could feel its armor cracking under the force of his strikes, hear the satisfying crunch of breaking exoskeleton. The Mind-Eater shrieked, a piercing sound that cut through the air like a knife. It lashed out wildly, its claws slicing through the air, but the Juggernaut was already moving, dodging and weaving, staying just out of reach. He could feel his own strength waning, his body aching from the effort, but he pressed on, refusing to let up. Finally, he saw his opening. The Mind-Eater's movements had become sluggish, its psychic attacks less focused, more erratic. He launched himself at the creature, tackling it to the ground. With a grunt of exertion, he pinned it beneath him, his hands gripping its throat. "Get out of my head!" he growled, his voice low and filled with fury. He squeezed, feeling the creature's throat collapse under his grip. It thrashed beneath him, its psychic hold breaking as its life force ebbed away. The arena fell silent, the crowd holding its breath as they watched the life drain from the Mind-Eater's eyes. As the creature went limp, the Juggernaut released his grip, his chest heaving with exertion. He stood slowly, feeling the weight of his exhaustion settling over him like a shroud. But he knew he couldn't rest. Not yet. There was still more to come, more challenges to face. And he would meet them, one by one, until there was no one left standing. As he turned to leave the arena, the crowd erupted in a mix of awe and fear, their voices a thunderous wave that echoed in his ears. He walked back to the preparation chamber, his steps heavy but determined, his mind already preparing for the next battle. He knew now, more than ever, that this was not just a fight for survival. It was a fight for Earth's honor, for its place in the galaxy. And he would not fail. The Juggernaut stood alone in the preparation chamber, the dim light casting long shadows on the walls around him. He could feel the weight of every battle pressing down on his shoulders, each victory a hard-won testament to his endurance and tenacity. His body ached from the relentless combat, bruises forming under the surface of his enhanced skin, yet his mind remained sharp, focused on what lay ahead. He knew the final round would be the hardest, the culmination of everything he had fought for. Dr. Callahan approached, his expression a mix of worry and determination. "This is it," he said quietly, his voice almost lost in the echoing space. "The last match. They've saved their best for you, a champion from their most elite warriors, someone who's never been defeated. This isn't just another fight. It's a test of everything you've learned, everything we've built." The Juggernaut nodded, his gaze steady. "I'm ready," he replied, though his mind was racing with questions. He had faced countless opponents, each more formidable than the last, but there was something different about this. He could sense it in Callahan's demeanor, the subtle shift in his tone. "What aren't you telling me?" the Juggernaut pressed, his eyes narrowing. "You're holding something back. I need to know everything if I'm going to win this." Callahan hesitated, his jaw clenching as he looked away. "They've been monitoring you closely, more than I anticipated. The final opponent isn't just a warrior. He's a hybrid like you. Enhanced, augmented, built to counter every strength you have. They've studied your every move, your strategies, and weaknesses. They're using your own tactics against you." A cold chill settled over the Juggernaut. It wasn't just the final battle, it was a mirror image of himself. An opponent designed to exploit his every flaw, a perfect counter. He took a deep breath, steadying his nerves. "So, it's me against myself," he said softly, the weight of his words sinking in. "In a way, yes," Callahan admitted, his voice heavy with resignation. "But you've got something he doesn't. You've learned to adapt, to think on your feet. You're not just a machine. You're human. Remember that. It's your greatest strength." The Juggernaut nodded, absorbing Callahan's words. He could feel his heartbeat slowing, his mind sharpening like a blade honed for battle. "I'll remember," he promised, turning toward the open gates of the arena. He could hear the distant rumble of the crowd, their anticipation like a living thing, a beast that needed to be fed. And he would feed it, one last time. He stepped into the arena, the blinding lights glaring down on him, casting long, dramatic shadows on the blood-stained sand. The roar of the crowd was deafening, a cacophony of alien voices and throbbing energy. But he blocked it all out, his focus narrowing to the center of the arena where his opponent awaited. The final challenger was already there, a figure clad in sleek, dark armor that mirrored the Juggernaut's own. His stance was confident, his eyes hidden behind a visor that gleamed with a sinister red light. He moved with a grace that was almost human but carried a mechanical precision that betrayed his enhancements. The Juggernaut could see the faint whirring of servos and the glint of cybernetic implants beneath the armor, a reminder of their shared nature, and yet a stark contrast. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena, announcing the final battle, but the Juggernaut barely heard it. His senses were heightened, every nerve alive with anticipation. He knew this fight would be different. This was no ordinary opponent. This was a reflection of himself, twisted and amplified, designed to break him. The bell rang, and the two fighters began to circle each other, every step measured, every movement calculated. The Juggernaut could feel his opponent's eyes on him, watching, analyzing. He knew he couldn't rely on his usual tactics. He needed to be unpredictable, to use his humanity, his instincts. The opponent struck first, a blur of motion that was almost too fast to follow. The Juggernaut dodged, narrowly avoiding a blow that would have shattered his ribs. He countered with a powerful kick aimed at the hybrid's knee, but his foot met only air as his opponent sidestepped with uncanny speed. The crowd erupted, a wave of noise that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath him. He could feel the tension rising, the energy crackling in the air. This wasn't just a fight. It was a spectacle, a final test of his worth. And he could feel the weight of every eye upon him, every breath held in anticipation. His opponent pressed the attack, each strike faster and more precise than the last. The Juggernaut was forced on the defensive, his enhanced reflexes barely keeping pace with the onslaught. He could feel his own strength waning, the exhaustion from the previous battles creeping into his limbs. He needed to change the rhythm, to regain control. He feinted to the left, then pivoted sharply, bringing his elbow up in a brutal arc aimed at his opponent's jaw. The hybrid moved to block, but the Juggernaut was already shifting his weight, dropping low and sweeping his leg out in a move designed to trip. The hybrid stumbled, just for a moment, but it was enough. The Juggernaut seized the opening, launching a series of rapid blows to his opponent's midsection, each hit reverberating through the hybrid's frame. He could feel the armor giving way, hear the faint crack of metal under pressure. His opponent grunted, a sound almost human, but there was no time to consider the implications. He had to stay focused. But just as he thought he'd gained the upper hand, the hybrid retaliated with a ferocity that caught him off guard. A powerful punch connected with his ribs, sending a shockwave of pain through his side. He staggered back, gasping for breath, but his opponent was relentless, pressing the attack with renewed vigor. The world seemed to narrow to a single point, every sound fading except for the pounding of his own heartbeat. He could feel the blood trickling down his side, the sharp sting of every breath. He was running out of time, out of options. He had to end this, now. Summoning the last of his strength, he launched himself forward, his fists a blur of motion. He struck with everything he had, his movements a blend of human intuition and mechanical precision. His blows landed with bone-shattering force, each one driving the hybrid back, breaking its defenses. With a final, desperate effort, he grabbed the hybrid by the shoulders, his fingers digging into the armor, and headbutted it with all his might. He felt the impact reverberate through his skull, a flash of white-hot pain, but he didn't let go. He held on, forcing his opponent down, refusing to give an inch. The hybrid struggled, its movements frantic and uncoordinated, but the Juggernaut held firm. He could feel his own strength fading, the edges of his vision darkening, but he knew he couldn't stop. Not yet. Not until he was sure. With a final roar of determination, he wrenched the helmet from the hybrid's head, revealing a face that was eerily familiar, his own, but twisted, distorted. He stared into those eyes, saw the fear, the confusion, and something else, a hint of recognition, of understanding. He hesitated, just for a moment, and in that moment he knew. The hybrid struggled, its movements frantic and uncoordinated, but the Juggernaut held firm. He could feel his own strength fading, the edges of his vision darkening, but he knew he couldn't stop. Not yet. Not until he was sure. With a final roar of determination, he wrenched the helmet from the hybrid's head, revealing a face that was eerily familiar, his own, but twisted, distorted. He stared into those eyes, saw the fear, the confusion, and something else, a hint of recognition, of understanding. He hesitated, just for a moment, and in that moment he knew. He knew that this was more than just a battle for survival. This was a battle for his soul, for the very essence of what made him human. And he would not let it be taken from him. With a final, decisive twist, he snapped the hybrid's neck, the sound a sharp crack that echoed through the silent arena. He stood there, panting, the broken body of his opponent at his feet, and slowly looked up at the crowd. For a moment there was silence, an unbearable, oppressive silence. And then, slowly, the noise began to rise, a thunderous roar of applause and cheers that shook the very ground beneath him. The Juggernaut straightened, his body screaming in protest, but he ignored the pain. He raised his fist in triumph, a gesture of defiance, of victory. He had won. Not just the battle, but something far more important. He had won his freedom, his humanity. As he turned to leave the arena, the weight of everything he had fought for settled over him. There would be more battles, more challenges, but he knew now that he could face them. Because he was more than just a warrior. He was human. And that was enough.